Neoliberalism. I think that's the first word in this chapter. Neoliberalism. Is that true? That's how the chapter starts. Like the very first word. Brendan thought the last chapter was confusing. This word has got to be one of the strangest words. One of the strangest words that the social sciences and people out there have ever proposed, because for most of us, I think, especially in the United States, we see this word liberal and we think, oh, liberal, they must be the liberals. And, you know, especially if they put the word neo in front of it, which we might know as new, right? We think, oh, they must be the new liberals, right? So it's like, you know, we going along and we think of these, watch out for those new liberals out there. But it turns out it's like referring back to an economic ideology of, I don't know, more than 100 years ago, almost 150, 200 years ago. In the 19th century, it was known as laissez-faire. So to be an economic liberal in the 19th century in, I guess you would say, North America and the UK, because it is a northern Atlantic word. To be that would be to be someone who supported less government restriction on markets. And so when people talked about themselves as neoliberal in the 1970s and 1980s, they were actually referring back to this idea, you know, they thought that things were too fettered, that had become too fettered, too shut down under the Keynesian economic approach of, say, the 1950s, 1960s, that the government was too much in control of things. And so it's not liberal at all. In fact, you might say it's probably, economically speaking, kind of conservative. Actually, Lewis, what do you find out about neoliberalism? You had to depart from Santa Bria completely in order to figure anything out about it, right?
Yeah, it was too many words.
Too many words. Too Santa Bria, man. He doesn't ever break it down. If you had to break it down for us, what's it about?
It's about supporting. I mean, supporting because some people see it as a political party.
Uh-huh.
Political stand.
Mm-hmm.
Free markets and government, reduced government spending. What else? I think that's it.
That is a great start. It's basically, we need more markets in every place you can find them, and we need to reduce the role of government. Now, I mean, this is kind of their word, you know, there's various versions of neoliberalism, and it's not, I mean, this is kind of it's my own reduced caricature in order to not use as many words and get us all confused. This was basically what they were saying. Reduce the role of government in society, bring in market-based practices into the world. And so it's, like I said, this has very little to do with what we think now of in the United States as liberals. It has almost nothing to do with them, because it goes back to this idea of the 19th century laissez-faire free market period. And importantly, what the neoliberals were arguing for was free trade, that people should be able to trade commodities, that they'd reduce the import taxes and the export taxes so that products could flow across borders fairly freely, and also capital or money could flow across borders fairly freely. What they never advocated for is that, you know, if you're going to free up stuff and you're going to free up money to move, you know, and there were some people, actually, I always liked my grandfather's approach was, hey, he was sort of a true neoliberal in the sense, he's like, well, let's make everything free. There shouldn't be any borders. You should be able to just go wherever you want. And so, I mean, the problem was, if you free up capital, but you don't let people cross the border, if you don't free them to move to where the jobs are, and I think you brought this out in your post too, Louis, that it seems to increase, even though people were trying to get people to stay where they were, it seemed to increase or exacerbate the economic immigration. So after these policies became enforced or became put into practice, more people were on the move because you're trying to chase around this capital that is the money and the factories that have suddenly become much more mobile than they were in the old days. So it has this strange effect. Like I said, there are very few people who were truly dedicated to freeing up not just commodities and capital, but freeing up people to move. Most people just put in the, capital gets to move, but people, the workers, have to stay where they are in their national borders. Now, I mentioned this in the last class, but the first country in Latin America to really fire this up to an extreme was Chile. After Pinochet got rid of Allende and the socialists, they took a hard right turn and pretty much implemented, they brought in these neoliberal economists from Chicago and really put this into practice in Chile. And, I think it had some pretty harsh effects in Chile. On the other hand, there was a decent level of what you might call economic development and growth once this happened. After that, after Chile, it got implemented in varying degrees through much of Latin America and the Caribbean in the 1980s. And again, as we talked about in the last class, for many people in Latin America, they called the 1980s the lost decade because there was very little economic growth, in part because people were dealing with these new recommendations, trying in various ways to retool their economies in order to enter what was called the kind of new neoliberal global order. You had the downfall of the Soviet Union and socialist forms, and so there wasn't a lot of economic growth in the 1980s for Latin America, but people were sort of trying to change their economies to deal with the new realities. So again, as we talked about in the last class, and I zapped up my slide from then, come the 1990s, some of these revolutionary struggles that had been prominent before, that we talked about yesterday into the justice and violence and memory chapter, kind of waned. And it's because of, or in some ways, prompted by the neoliberal order, inequality, both within and between countries, seemed to increase. So Hoffman and Centeno in Sanabria called the Americas a lopsided continent in which you had, rich countries and poor countries, or within country inequalities. And I talked about in the last class how, it's ironic that people have gave up on the idea of socialism or gave up on the idea of equality at a time when inequality seems to rise to extraordinarily high levels. In this chapter, Sanabria also mentioned something that we talked about in the last class, the idea of multiculturalism. So that in some ways, up until this time, we talked about how state violence against indigenous peoples, against African-descended peoples, was very prominent in Latin America, and there was an extreme inequality, and it was often reinforced by the state, by the military, by the police forces. During the time of the neoliberal era, the counterpoint or the accompanying policy to the economic changes was this idea that the state shouldn't really be involved at all in identity formation, and that they should instead adopt a policy of multiculturalism. And in many countries, such as Colombia, for example, they adopted, I don't know if I want to call it a progressive constitution, but it was at least a constitution that recognized the rights of indigenous populations, of African-descended populations in the country, and said that the government was there to protect, for a certain extent, to protect those rights, and definitely not to violate them all the time. And so, as I was reading Santa Bria, I was surprised. There I was. Oh my gosh, me. Kind of like a bad picture. You know, when you take a picture of you and you're like, ah, don't use that picture. But anyway, back in the day, I wrote something about this in Colombia, which is that the state in some ways tries to appear like it's completely neutral, that it has no position on this. But what I was trying to say is that in some ways, that exacerbates the struggles or the problems between these groups. And so it makes it look as if racism is only something that happens, or ethnic conflict is something that happens outside of the state, and the state is just there to kind of be the referee or the neutral arbiter. And so what I was trying to say, or I was trying to figure out, is how is it that even in a context in which the official constitution is neutral or trying to defend the rights of Indigenous and African-descended peoples, that nevertheless it continues the problems that people have had in society, because in some ways the state completely retreats and acts like they have nothing to do with the situation, that they have no role here. And so it can actually, paradoxically, I don't know if that's the right word, it can increase the violence against these groups, because the state says it has nothing to do with it. It has no role here. And so it doesn't necessarily lead to a progressive civil society in these places. So thanks, Santa Bria. Get my little plug, my little citation there. Second word in the chapter, and it goes with neoliberalism, is NAFTA, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is very much associated with this idea that that trade and capital should be free. And this was an agreement that was signed under Bill Clinton in the 90s. And it, basically, it was complex. It wasn't that everything got freed up. There were lots and lots of different rules and regulations, but it did, in terms of commodities and capital, lead to a tighter integration of Canada, the United States, and Mexico, or the North American Free Trade Agreement. There's been a ton of debate about NAFTA, NAFTA's effects, whether it was good or bad, if it created trade, if it created jobs, if people lost jobs, did it hurt the farmers, did it help and I guess it's hard to say, it's not just one thing. So as Santa Bria says, there were winners and losers all over the place. So, because it was a pretty sweeping agreement, because there was increased trade, there were definitely people who lost out on this, but there were definitely people who won, and it wasn't simply the rich in every place. So it's been a complex agreement. I guess I would say today, when we think, when there was debate around, when this agreement was signed, and a lot of people were upset about it, but it's pretty difficult to imagine going to not having the North American Free Trade Agreement, in the sense that as we talked about in the very first class, the intertwining of the economies of Latin America with the United States, and certainly in NAFTA of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. I think I told you that Trump at certain points in his presidency threatened to close the border. He said, I'll just close it off. And people are like, oh, no. You'd have 3-day backups of trucks coming in both directions, because a lot of things are so tightly integrated that they may be produced on both sides of the border. So they'll be produced, in one instance, partially produced in Mexico. They'll come across to the United States for a different process, then go back to Mexico to be further worked on. So it's very tightly integrated, the US and Mexican economy, as well as the US with with Canada. So it's difficult to imagine how we could unentangle this. Nevertheless, in 2018, we officially ended NAFTA. And this was something that Trump had said he was going to do, as kind of a campaign promise. He said he was always against NAFTA, that it was a terrible deal and he'd get rid of it and oppose it. And in fact, it ended and it was replaced with the USMCA. So instead of saying NAFTA, we now can say USMCA. Doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well. The USMCA, which is, you know, I was looking up, I mean, when this was being negotiated, it's an updated NAFTA. So there are some things that it further specifies a little bit that certain products have to have more North American labor content. Some of the environmental and labor regulations are a bit tighter. So it hasn't necessarily been opposed by labor unions the way that NAFTA was back in the day, because it does seem to tighten that up a little bit. And there's some dairy rules, but for all intents and purposes, it's pretty much just updating with minor modifications NAFTA. And so I've been confused about this as to why Trump was so excited to get this new NAFTA in. And he said, NAFTA is done, it's this thing. I couldn't figure out, why is he so excited about this thing, other than, you know, the overpromise and underdeliver of his whole life. And I decided that it's because he doesn't like the word North America. He wants to have the US first. There it is, USMCA. Probably better to have Canada last too, right? You get Canada way out there. Oh, maybe the A is agreement, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. Hey, look, we get to be first and we get to be 2 letters too. Take that, Canada. Ha. Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm riffing here a little bit, but it is basically and NAFTA needed to be updated. It had been, you know, how many years? Many years since almost 25 years since it was originated. So it needed to be updated. I don't know if it really changes that much, and it keeps our economies integrated. It didn't change, obviously, the migration patterns. All right, I wanted to talk, I told you, it'd be more fun to do the banter than it is to do this chapter. I want to talk about, Sanabria mentions femicide in Mexico, and I remember that Brendan back in few classes ago talked about the death of women in Mexico, and this is something that Sanabria brings up here, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about it. It's a sad but kind of confusing thing, which is that, so there were a lot of jobs that opened up, and this had been going on from before NAFTA. This started in the 1980s, that were in these, what we might call sweatshops or maquiladoras, oftentimes in textile work. And they opened up on the Mexican side of the border, but near the United States. And it was foretelling this very tight integration between the US and Mexico. But unlike some of the jobs that had been created in Mexico after the Mexican Revolution and their attempt to industrialize the country, most of these jobs were staffed by women. And so women's employment in these areas increased tremendously. There was a lot of internal migration to try and get to these jobs. At the same time, you had a farming decline, which was mainly men, and you had a manufacturing job decline. And so you had these new opportunities for women, but at the same time, male jobs were disappearing. And well, we may know in our own country that there's been a decent amount of resentment about the disappearance of manufacturing jobs and these kinds of things. And so, you know, some people have speculated if the violence against female bodies is linked to these economic and political changes, in the sense that people experience resentment toward the women who have these opportunities, as well as a commodification of labor that did not exist before. And I put a question there because this is somewhat speculative. I mean, you can't necessarily prove this. This is something that is perhaps a social change. Does that lead to this increase in violence against women, which is, some people would just say, oh, well, that's a cultural thing and a macho culture, whereas others would point to these economic and political transformations in society which have increased this tendency. So the first part of the chapter is about neoliberalism, the definition, what it is, how it was influential in Latin America, the specific example of NAFTA and Latin America, and some of the good and perhaps other more awful side effects. The last part of the chapter is about immigration. And I wanted to frame this as, what I want to tell you is what I'm going to call 7 immigration truths. And this is kind of different than the way I used to frame it in the past, because in the past I would say, I would try to disabuse people of 7 immigration myths. So I talk about all the things that were wrong with the ways that people traditionally talked about immigration. And taking my cue from the linguist George Lakoff, he's been pushing this for a while, but it's especially important. It was especially important during well, actually, it's still super important. We are going to be confronting, and we have been confronting, various conspiracy theories and fake facts and all kinds of misinformation. This seems to be part of our lives. And what Lakoff was saying is the way that you respond to these things is you first start with a truth. You have to start with the truth. You don't start by saying, no, it isn't. So you start with the truth, then you say what the lie is without echoing it or amplifying the lie. And then you go back to the truth. Always repeat truth more than lies. And you see people fall into this all the time. It kind of, there was a crucial moment here where people, I think, realized how this was happening when people said, Obama's a Muslim. And so people would frame it as, they would say, no, he's not a Muslim. But just by saying that, just by saying no and Muslim together, it wouldn't help people understand that Obama was a Christian, because it started with the lie and then tried to disprove the lie, and all that stuck in people's minds was still the lie. So, trying to redo my immigration stuff, I'll give you an example, or actually, Lydia, you talked about this example, which is Leo Chavez's work. Now, Leo Chavez is a very famous anthropologist. He's probably done a huge amount of work on immigration into the United States from Latin America. He himself has perhaps obviously Latin American roots. He has a very public presence. So, I don't want to criticize somebody too much, but Lydia, what do you think about when you see a book like this? What's your first thought?
I don't know if it was just me, but like reading it the way that when I kind of quickly read over the whole portion of him, I thought he had like the stance I would not take on this issue. And then it wasn't until I read it another time and realized that. And I think I said in my post, but especially after the whole portion that was all the stuff, bad stuff that has happened in the last decade or so. And then this coming up to it, I think I was trying to think that this was also saying that same thing. I thought it was confusing also because I would assume he has like Latin American background. But I don't know, from reading it at first glance, it's like you said, he put the lie first, and then, so it sounded like he was taking the position of the lie, not the truth.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, yeah, it's at first glance. Like if you look at this book, and the book is titled The Latino Threat, and you're like, oh, the Latino threat. That's what you see. The book is about, right? I mean, his book is trying to deconstruct or counter the idea of the Latino threat, but there it is staring you in the face, the Latino threat. And actually, I looked up I think you mentioned his more recent book. He gave a talk at Harvard based on his more recent book, and there's the title, A Big Old Anchor Babies, right there, staring at you in the face, and the challenge of birthright citizenship. Like if you just looked at this, you'd be like, well, this guy is against, I mean, even using the term anchor babies is very obnoxious and racist in itself, actually. The idea that people are coming into the United States and somehow sneaking in and then quickly having a baby so they can stay here. And, I mean, in some ways, I feel like it's like, I don't know what I want to say. It's amplifying what is basically a lie. And so, like I said, he's done far more work on immigration than me and has been a far more public figure. But at the same time, I feel like this is something where you need the truth sandwich. You need some truth in there instead of amplifying the lie. Now, it could be a trick. It could be a great selling strategy. You put these in the anti-immigrant section of the bookstore, and somebody, I'll buy that Latino threat and increase your sales. And, then people read it and like they're converted. I kind of have my doubts about that. But, this is an example of maybe you need to reframe your thing.
It needs to be like unraveling the lies of Latino threat, or like something like that.
You gotta start with the truth. So you have to start with, but I can't reword it right now. I'll tell you my truth, and then you can tell me how I did. All right, first truth. If we look today at the percentage of foreign-born residents in the United States, it is less than it was 130 years ago, and it's less than it is in a place like Canada. So if you look at the most recent years that we have figures, in 2018, about 13.7% of the people in the United States were born in a different country. They reside here, but were born in a different country. Now, in 1970, that percentage of foreign-born residents hit what is an all-time low of 4.7%. So what is true is that the people who grew up, say, in the 1970s or around the 1970s might think today, like, oh my God, the immigrants, there's so many immigrants here, but it's because their comparison number is the all-time low of 1970. If you look back in the day at 1890, where you had 14.8%, or 1910 at 14.7%, basically, the same, this is still the all-time high in the United States. And so we have not broached that all-time high. There are some people who say we will. I doubt it, especially the way things are going right now. I don't think we're going to get above that all-time high. So, the people are like, oh, no. Historically speaking, there is a lower percentage of foreign-born residents in the United States in comparison to the weirdo year of 1970 and that very restrictive time. Sure, but it's not a big deal. And if Canada, those people to the north of us with their weird Canadian customs, can live with 21% foreign-born residents, we can handle 13.7%. Not a big deal. So let's remember that our percentage of foreign-born residents is less than it has been historically and is less than other other countries, even the nearby ones. That's my first truth. A second truth, which many people don't understand. I didn't understand it for a long time. A lot of the people who immigrated to the United States from Europe in the 19th century went back to Europe. So we often hear about people who immigrated to the United States, and we compare that to people from places today, and we say, these people today, they just keep going back and forth, and why don't they just come and stay like my grandparents did? And the truth of the matter is that, that as researchers have shown, about 40% or as high as 40% of the Europeans who came to the United States went back to Europe. And they actually then faced the challenge of being, as Dino Sinel puts it, reintegrated or integrated into, say, Italian society. Because, you know, you had these people who had been in the United States and then had then returned. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of people who immigrated to the United States during this time just wanted to have some money, get a bit of standing in life, and then go back to where they had come from. And I kind of knew this growing up because my great-grandfather came to the United States from Italy, worked here for a while. They had my grandfather here, so I guess technically he was an anchor baby. He got US citizenship there. And then when my grandfather was 6 years old, they went back to Italy. And so my grandfather, although he had a US passport, eventually would get a passport, he had US citizenship, spent the years from being 6 years old up to being 18 years old in Italy, and then was able to escape Mussolini's Italy and immigrate to the United States, even though he actually was a citizen. Well, that was why he was able to. Anyway, the point of the matter is that the contemporary peoples of the Caribbean or Latin America or Mexico are not the first to sort of come and go. That's what Europeans were doing. We often don't see it. And I mean, there's a very simple reason that we don't see it. If you are a person here in the United States who is descended from European immigrants, you don't see the people who went back because you're a descendant of the people who ended up staying here or got stuck here. Some of them were trying to get to other places and kind of got stuck along the way. So, you know, this is a very important truth about migration in last century as well as today. Truth number 3. Like I said, a lot of people just came here because they wanted food and they wanted a job. When I was 10 years old, 10-year-old me, little me, before I got cited by Santa Bria, I used to go and my grandparents would have these big parties with their, you know, the people who had immigrated from Italy, and they'd speak Italian and they'd talk about the old country and how great it was. And eventually, flag-waving little me got pissed off and talked to this and asked this older relative, well, why'd you come here for then? If it was so great in your country, in Italy, why'd you come here? Didn't you come here for freedom? Didn't you come here for the high ideals of the country that I'm learning about in school? And I was very fortunate because she turned to me and she said, do you think if we'd had enough food to eat that we would have ever come to this place? I said, oh, okay, got it. Which is to say, you know, the contemporary people who are looking for a job today are not the only ones who are looking for jobs. That's why my relatives came. If they would have had enough food, if they would have had enough money, if they wouldn't have had to been pressed into military service, they definitely didn't come here because somebody was waving a flag and telling them how free they'd be. No. All right, you've seen this before, so I'm not going to go through it that long. Santa Bria mentions it here too, about English and the learning of English. I think I told you this on the first class, which is that people learn English in the United States. In fact, not only do they learn English, almost all immigrants are monolingual in English, if they stay here by, by the time they have grandchildren, they don't remember anything, or maybe have a tiny bit, I know a couple words, maybe in Italian, but it's like a tiny bit of society. And that applies to Spanish speakers today. It's no different. This is a place where if you look at the second generation, they're always fully bilingual in English. And if you look at the third generation, almost always they don't know anything about about Spanish. It's kind of, sometimes it's sad because, I've had students at Hartwick and they have great Spanish last names, and I'll try to speak to them in Spanish and they have nothing. And so it's like, they'll go take a Spanish class to try and get some idea of what's going on, because we're not big into foreign language learning in this country. We are not big into it at all. So, the kids generally forget like I said, by the third generation, it's basically over. All right, fifth truth. A lot of people, the number of undocumented immigrants, people who are here without having all the legal requirements, has actually been in decline since 2010. So there was a pretty large increase in undocumented immigrants, as we said, after NAFTA, during the neoliberal period, with the Central American, the Central American conflicts. There was a large increase up until around 2010, but from 2010 until now, that number has actually been going down. So this was from 2019, which said, we're at a 25-year low in terms of undocumented immigrants. And like I said, it actually, I take that back. It peaked in 2000, then dropped from 2010 and has been declining since then. And I say that as a truth because you hear a lot of people like, oh, there's so many, there's more and more and more. It's like, no, not more and more and more. Actually, for the last 20 years, there's been fewer and fewer and fewer, yet, this is not something that you hear about. So in terms of undocumented immigrants, people who are, the so-called illegal immigrants, this number has actually been declining. I think I read too that actually the largest group of undocumented residents right now is from overstaying visas and not from border crossings, but that's something I have to look more into. I know the overall number is a lot less. All right, this one to me is a huge thing that almost nobody knows, which is the relationship between undocumented immigrants and taxes. What's the deal with taxes and undocumented immigrants, Brendan? See if he's there.
I am. Yeah, sorry, give me a sec. Yeah, Sabrina said in the chapter.
Santa Bria. Sabrina's
Santa
my
Bria.
daughter,
Oh God. Santa Bria. I took some quotes from page 322 because I thought that went really into it, and some of the quotes I found were, "These 7 million undocumented workers are crucial for the U.S. economy." And then another one I found was, "We are often told that undocumented immigrants are a burden to the U.S. economy because they do not pay taxes. This is a misperception. They do pay taxes, sales taxes."
Okay, yeah, the sales taxes are important, and that's true. And I mean, just because everybody who lives and has to transact here, especially in a state like New York that has a sales tax, is going to get a sales tax from. We don't ask for your immigration status before we charge you a sales tax on your pizza. What a lot of people though don't realize, and I want to go into a little bit, is that undocumented, we have this with this image of undocumented immigrants that, you know, you go drive down to the store and you pick one up in the back of your truck and then you pay them off the books. And that's happens. It's not that it doesn't happen. It is part of many immigrants' lives. But approximately, I mean, it's sometimes difficult to get exact numbers on this, but about half to as many as 75% of the undocumented immigrants actually have, on paper, they have paperwork that's just not entirely, how to say, it's not entirely legal. So they have documents and they sign up and they have, they actually pay, they're on the books as paying taxes. Some of them even file taxes, which is an interesting thing because, you know, you're never going to get your money back that way. But in terms of even employment taxes, like I said, about half to 75% are actually officially kind of on the books. It's not like they don't have documents. It's just that those documents are not, they aren't all on the up and up. So yeah, there's a huge role of immigrants, even undocumented immigrants, in paying taxes on the state, local, and even federal level. Oh, my truth number 7. This is actually one of my sadder truths to report to you, is that I've been, you know, thinking about immigration and talking about this and promoting people like Leo Chavez. And for the last, I don't know how many years, it doesn't seem to have any effect. You know, we've had some glimpses that we might pass some immigration policies that would make sense, and every so often we'll do something. But for the most part, people don't know. It doesn't influence our policy making. Even, you know, I think Biden has come out with an idea that, for example, he's going to create a path to citizenship for the undocumented workers that would take him, I don't know, another 10 years or something, 7 years maybe, to become citizens. And as soon as that came out, some senator who shouldn't even be a senator came off and said, oh, he's proposing amnesty. So, you know, I don't know, we're still stuck in these debates. And the problem is that even though anthropologists and others have done some huge research on this, it doesn't seem to have any role in the national conversation about this. And I don't know, maybe part of it is the fact that we don't seem to have a truth sandwich approach to this. I put up here an image from Ruth Gomberg Munoz's book, Becoming Legal, Immigration Law and Mixed Status Families, which is in some ways about some of these things where, you know, when people get born in different places, some of them have papers, some of them don't, and how do you reconcile that with the legal system and trying to unify families, for example. I really like Gomberg Munoz is a terrific person. She wrote a great book called Labor and Legality, which I used to assign. And so I wanted to give her this image of this other book that she wrote, Becoming Legal. But then I looked at that sign. Yeah, so here we have a, you know, we have a kind of a protest here, or a movement to try and reform the immigration laws, and then they have the American flags, so that's good. And then they have the sign that says, "We want our mother here," which to me, I guess, is being a person who I would say is in favor of and because of the anthropological research, knows how much immigrants contribute to our lives and thinks they should be treated with dignity. This is a powerful statement. We want our mother here. We need your family unified. But help me out here. I just see this and then I think of the reaction of someone who doesn't like immigrants. What's their reaction?
They would think like, oh, you're bringing more in.
Ah, yes, thanks, Gabe. I think that's reinforcing what Lydia is saying. It's like, you know, I can imagine somebody being like, well, go back to your mother then. What are you even doing here? Come on. I don't know, I'm being even harsher. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, once you start them, now they're going to bring their moms. Yeah, you know, so I don't know. I don't know what to do about this situation. I'm not sure. You know, try the truth sandwich. We're gonna try that as much as we can these years, the upcoming years. I actually have a bonus truth number 8, but having 8 truths didn't sound as good as having 7. So this is my bonus truth. It's a bonus truth because we're hopefully we are entering into a new administration. Lydia wanted to know what it'll be like. Gabe wanted to know what it's like to have 4-year whiplash every time an administration changes. And I just want to say that we have to be, if we are interested in changing things, we have to be perhaps especially vigilant under a Democrat or a liberal administration. If you look back historically at what the US-Mexico border was like, Bill Clinton's administration really intensified the militarization of the US-Mexico border. And it was a trade-off with some things that he also wanted to do. And you know, I mean, you may have heard of the policing acts that were passed under his administration. But it was a time in which they really did increase the militarizing of the border, and some of the border policies that we have now really took shape under Clinton. And if you want to talk about an administration that really increased the number of deportations, the Obama administration deported lots and lots of people. I don't know. I mean, when Trump was running in 2016, he said what he wanted to do was, what Obama was doing, but with more, with more force. And, you know, that's basically what he did. I'm not going to get into a debate about, you know, who caused what, but, you know, basically, you know, Obama did increase by a lot the number, especially of deportations. And, you know, Trump ran under the idea of, well, just use this machinery that's already there and we'll just ramp it up more. You know, now, I mean, we can give, I don't want to be totally down on Obama. We have the deferred action, again, deferred action for childhood arrivals and various attempts to normalize immigration policy. But I put this bonus truth out there because we're entering, hopefully, a new period, hopefully a more sane and rational and fact-based period in our lives. But that doesn't mean that we aren't vulnerable to or can perpetuate the same issues or be even worse about immigration and human rights in our own country under a Democratic administration. So I'm going to hope for the good and, you know, but be vigilant and remember the truth to take you through.